Thank you. So I'm going to read for you, and concurrently I have to edit my song because it is relatively long. But you got to understand that we have a tremendous misconception with respect to the continent of Africa, and I'm here to demystify that misconception. Africa is not poor. They all tell you Africa is poor. Famine here, war here, poor. It's the richest continent in the world. The riches are being stolen. Systematically stolen. So ultimately, of course, the Africans will decide their own fate. They will come, that day will come. But in any case, I have to give you some introductory notes so that you can have a good understanding of what is actually happening on the ground in the continent. Okay? So let me give you some background. This was actually written sometime in 2003 in a book called Globalizing Africa that I contributed a chapter for that book. And the title that I actually offered for that voluminous book is Africa in the Global Economy, the same title I'm using now, slightly changed to Debt, Aid, and Development. In that I say, despite over 4 centuries of exchange relations, initially with the Middle East, Europe, and Asia, including the international European slave trade and subsequent colonization, Africa was never fully integrated into the global economy. On the one hand, if we see it in the context of European imperialism and colonial hegemony, Africa was probably the most globally penetrated continent. No other continent was brought under the world's least developed continent. It was and remains on the periphery of the global economy. Despite enormous cultural coalescence with more Anglophone and more Francophone countries in Africa than in any other continent, the former colonial powers developed negligible educational institutions and healthcare systems and infrastructure to facilitate their interest on the continent. Moreover, they took pains to destroy Africa's indigenous institutions and traditions, leaving post-independence leaders ill-equipped to address the enormous challenge of governing modern national states. In order to further understand Africa's marginality and underdevelopment, however, it's imperative to track back, at least briefly, to the period of enslavement of Africans by emergent capitalist Europe, which I like to dub as Africa's original curse. I'm using the word curse in a metaphoric sense, not in the literal sense. There were 2 curses that Africa encountered. One is the enslavement of its people. The second is the colonization of the continent. And both curses came from Europe. During the Holocaust of enslavement, Africa lost at least 20 million. Figures could be controversial. Some say 40 million, some say more. But the consensus that we have now is 20 million, okay? Of its human resources to the Americas. These African slaves were not only physically fit multitude, they were not just physically fit multitude. Actually, they are portrayed in some Hollywood movies, okay? On the contrary, most of them were skilled laborers, professionals, and some had earned critical knowledge that was utilized in the development of the Americas. You cannot imagine America's agriculture without African labor. You cannot imagine European industry without African labor. That's the truth. That's the historical fact. Corroborating the above ideas, Sheila Walker contends as follows. Sheila Walker is a social critic, a historian. She grew up in New Jersey, but now she teaches at the University of Texas in Houston. She says the following: the transatlantic slave trade, the largest population relocation in the history of humankind, was thus not just an unskilled labor migration. European and Euro-American commercialization and commodification of the lives of African human beings represent, more importantly, the world's first and most massive brain drain transfer of technology. You probably don't know. Most of you are African American. All of us are Africans. But you probably don't know about your heritage. Those people who came to South Carolina and Louisiana came directly from the Senegambia. And they were the first ones to introduce rice direct irrigation. They taught the Europeans how to cultivate rice by irrigation. That's critical knowledge. In brief, so we've lost all those professionals. In brief, Africa's linkage to Europe and the Americas in the context of slavery is aptly depicted in what historians call the triangular trade. You will encounter this triangular trade. You can just make a triangle. Can you do that? Triangle in your mind. Triangle. The first triangle at the base is African labor. The triangle, the line on this side is American plantation. The other line is European industry. They're all connected. That triangle represents actually African labor, American plantation, and European industry. So what we have to have is, ultimately, after slavery, the second curse comes. The second curse is the underdevelopment of the continent, ecological disaster, and widespread famines are in fact retrospectively attributable to the triangular trade. And most media, Hollywood, American TV, I hope you're going to do it in your program. I hope you're going to do all these things in your program. They all tell you that famine is going on in Japan, given age, they need, they're dying, they're starving, all those things. They're not telling you the cause for that famine. There was famine in 1973 in West Africa, that area called Sahel. The Sahel is actually the geographical area between the Sahara Desert and the Savannah. That was dried up completely in 1973. The people had nothing to eat. They were starving in millions. But the cause for that actually was the peanut farming that the French introduced in West Africa. They were cutting the forests, they were cutting the grasslands, they were depriving the farmers of their farmlands, and they actually transformed it into what they call cash crop. In order to have cash crop, what does peanut? What does the peanut? What's the purpose of that peanut? What's the purpose? Can anybody tell me? What's the purpose of coca? Does anybody of you know? Coca comes from Ghana and Ivory Coast. Where does it end up? In Hershey, Pennsylvania. The candies that they eat, the M&Ms that they eat, the Hershey stuff is all from Africa. In order to do that, therefore, they have to clear the forest. And Africans were starving in millions. And then they say, let's go and help them. We need to help these guys. They've done, of course, they've done all those things. But Africans are not going to eat those pesticide-infested food. They're going to be sick, as a matter of fact. Anyway, what ultimately happened is, on top of exploiting raw materials for free, Europeans were there. If you begin with 1830 colonization of Algeria and the colonization of other African countries, they were there from 1830 to 1960 for over 100 years. In some cases it was shorter, of course. But for 150 years, they had free lunch. They've taken everything from Africa. They have free lunch too. Now they're talking about debt. Africa has burden. We give them money. They're not paying us. Why would Africans pay them back? On the contrary, actually, Europeans should really pay Africans for what they're saying. Okay. So what happened is a good example of this scenario, what I was telling you.